From vaudeville to the silver screen to the small screen, the Marx Brothers made an impact wherever people found them. Now, Tom Fox and Mike Volkov bring them into the boardroom to help explain and explore the sometimes chaotic world of governance, risk management, ethics, and compliance. This is Why a Duck? Into the Compliance Soup, which is part of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. This is going to be a little bit different series this time on Why a Duck. We are going to dispense with a discussion of the Marx Brothers movie and have a 5-part series on COVID-19 and the role of compliance. We're going to take a look at various angles and perspective, including the board of directors, the CCO, ethical companies, new laws and regulations, crisis management, and leadership. Mike and I have written extensively on this subject, and we've linked to all of our posts and podcasts in the show notes, so I hope you will check those out for additional resources. In this part 4, we focus on the role of the Chief Compliance Officer during the COVID-19 crisis.
Well, welcome. Mike Volkov here with Tom Fox, and we're here for part 4 on our COVID-19 and compliance series. Today, we're going to talk about the role of the Chief Compliance Officer. Tom, this is, you like to say that compliance officers never sleep during any day-to-day work, but during this crisis, it's even more pronounced. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Sure, Mike. Today, we wanted to talk about some of the specific in-the-weeds tactical things that you can do as a compliance officer during this time. Really, Mike, it all starts with, are you set up to work remotely? Is your team set up to work remotely? How can you, as the compliance officer, bring a more positive attitude, not only to your team, but to your organization? So one of the key things, I think, for the compliance professional is, as much as you may have communicated before, you need to double that now. You need to check in with your peers at the C-suite, but you need to put out as much compliance-related communication as you can. This does not mean new training, but compliance reminders, information. Keep people engaged. Keep them thinking about your company's ethical values and why they are important, even if your multi-thousand-person workforce scattered across the globe is now working remotely. This is, I think, a key step that every compliance practitioner, starting with a CCO down, should be doing. So please consider that type of messaging out. What about the time you have? In any sort of crisis, you're going to have time crunch. So now would be a really good time to not sweat the small stuff. To put that into perspective, perhaps you could look at what are your company's risks. In some of the earlier podcasts, we talked about how your risks may have changed over the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they may change going forward in a 1, 2, 3 week period, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. But take a look at your risks and risk rank them so that you can deliver a risk management solution to your risks. Recognizing to do that, you're going to have to assess your risk. And that would be a great task for your compliance team to be doing right now. This helps keep your team focused, and it gives you a deliverable that you can execute upon, but you can also deliver to senior management to really demonstrate where compliance is adding not simply value to the organization, but a more efficient business process. And you may not be profitable during these next 60 days, but at least you can help the cash flow and keep liquidity high within your organization. But it all starts with knowing your own risks and in managing those risks going forward. There's also, in terms of some larger or more significant risks, some things that you can do, Mike. We talked in an earlier podcast about your third-party management, and we talked a lot about the supply chain and what position you may be in if you have a sole source supplier or other suppliers who can't deliver now. But in terms of your supply chain, are you going to help your supply chain, your key supply chain partners Are you going to be able to help them going forward? Are you going to be able to help them, remind them about their obligations, that compliance never sleeps? The same is true of your third parties on the sales side. At the fraud triangle reminds us that when there's high pressure, that can lead to fraud. Well, corruption is just a subset of fraud, and if people are desperate for new business, they might start to cut corners. And you do not want that. You don't want that starting on your sales side. So re-emphasize to your third-party partners the importance of compliance and ethical values. What about internal controls? You may have robust internal controls in your organization. But how do you know that? Now would be a great time for you to do a gap analysis on your internal controls. Sit down and literally map out your financial controls to the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. But equally importantly is who's looking at your internal controls? Who is overseeing those? Are those people working remotely? Well, of course they are right now. And they probably will be working remotely at least through the end of April and probably as well through the end of May. SAP, Oracle, every other major ERP system does not automatically give notifications when someone overrides, circumvents, or goes around an internal control. Somebody has to be watching. So in terms of your internal controls, who's watching your internal controls? And what about, I know liquidity may be a problem, but how can you utilize the information that sits within your own company? I'm not advocating you spend money, but I am advocating that you knock down silos, which would allow you to look at employee information, which would allow you to look at gifts, travel, and entertainment expenses, which would allow you to look at charitable donations and political contributions. Data that is within your organization. You may have software tools which allows you to analyze that data in a much more robust way than you ever had previously. So some of those things I think are going to be important going forward as well. And then if you do have time and you do find yourself with things to do, well, now would be a great time to catch up. When was the last time you went through your files to make sure that they are in Tom Fox mantra, document, document, document? Are all of your third-party files fully documented? Are there any things that you could look at in terms of your own information? Can you do a desktop risk assessment? Stephen Martin talks about a 1, 3, or 5-year compliance plan. When was the last time you updated your compliance plan? Now would be a great time for you to do so. So there's lots of things that you can do as a CCO. I wanted to, Mike, go into some weeds and really talk about some specific tactics. What are some of the things that you've been counseling people to engage in?
Tom, let's start. I think your framework is well stated. To me, communications in a remote working environment is even more important right now. So I would start with communicating with empathy and concern, because obviously we're always concerned about the safety and health of our employees. The other thing that I would do is seek to inform and engage our employees as much as we can about compliance issues. But most importantly, let's start with our values. What are our ethical values that are going to guide us? What's our culture? And then try to be part of the message working. Hopefully you have a good working relationship with HR, and in terms of protecting your employees and in protecting their safety and health, and try to be a messenger on that. And what are we doing to preserving the company? One thing that I would add to Tom's list of recommendations is the best way to move your compliance message is through your senior compliance committee. I would make sure that you have a virtual meeting and get on a regular basis and get the messaging out so that they can reinforce it to their troops. Remember that you may have 10 people who are key stakeholders on your compliance committee. Take advantage of that as a way to cascade the message out there that Tom is talking about. And the other thing I want to reiterate is reassess your risks on a daily basis, and they are changing. And what are your risks as you look around? Your third-party risks, a lot of it circles around continuity. Who's really staying out there? Who's available? Who's shut down? I mean, I read today that about 30% of our economy is basically shut down. 30% of our businesses are basically shut down, beyond just restaurants, beyond the service industries that depend upon people to such an extent. So we have to be mindful of that. We also, on a more specific issue, set of issues, we've seen the Justice Department come out with two important reminders. One is antitrust issues. In a day where we're fighting for, let's say, supplies or fighting to survive in the marketplace, there's even more greater opportunities to engage in cartel behavior or illegal agreements with competitors. Be very careful about that, because the Justice Department reminded everybody about this and said they're going to be vigilant with respect to this issue. The other issue to watch over is hoarding. There's now an FBI hoarding and price gouging task force, and it basically is triggered by HHS designating certain products and product categories. No, toilet paper is not on the list, but we have medical supplies and important medical supplies that are on the list. But be mindful of that, because there also are reputational issues. If for whatever reason you end up in a situation where your company is providing an essential service to people, remember there's going to be lots of public scrutiny, government scrutiny. So you want to make sure that compliance is at the table, making sure that these issues are being looked at. So that's kind of my perspective. But Tom, I thought your outline of ideas and communications ideas and tasks and prioritizing things was perfect.
So, Mike, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for our concluding episode, part 5, where we take a look at your clarion call for leadership and some final thoughts on where we are right now. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Why a Duck. Make sure to subscribe, and if you enjoyed the episode, leave a review.